from DocuSign, and I'll be your moderator today. Let me start by saying thank you for making the time in your busy schedule for this very important topic. Contract management is changing, and there are some exciting new developments that we will discover and discuss in this hour. Our speakers today include Andrew Bartolini and Matthew York from Ardent Partners. We also have a special guest, Mariella Ettinger from Safeway, who will be joining us. Just a little bit about our speakers today. So Andrew Bartolini, he's the Chief Research Officer at Ardent Partners and publisher of CPO Rising. He's a globally recognized expert in sourcing, procurement, supply management, and lately, increasingly, accounts payable as well. I've had the pleasure of knowing Andrew for the last several years, and I'm an eager consumer, Andrew, of all the great content from your publication.
Oh, great.
Matt York is a senior procurement researcher at Ardent Partners, and his primary areas of research include sourcing, contracts, procurement, and supply risk. Matthew was previously at Aberdeen Group, again, very deep expertise in procurement, and we're happy to have Matthew here today. Next, we have Mariella. Mariella is a friend and a strategic sourcing group director at Safeway. Mariella manages about $4 billion in indirect spend and is leading the charge toward digitization, and is an enthusiastic supporter of electronic signatures. Mariella is going through an amazing journey at the moment at Safeway, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the webinar today. So thank you, Mariella, for being here. And finally, myself. I am the Global Head of Procurement at DocuSign. Previously, I've been in operations, supply chain, and procurement roles at several companies, including Cisco and Kaiser Permanente. So everyone on our panel today is very familiar with the challenges involved in contract management, and we're all excited to be tackling this topic today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew and Matt, and they're going to walk us through the majority of the presentation, and we'll make sure that there's plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Andrew, off to you.
Great. Thank you, Anu. We are both very excited to be here, speaking for Matt. So just real quick, right, so Ardent Partners, we're a research and advisory firm based in Boston, Massachusetts. We focus, solely on supply management, right? So we look at the strategies, the processes, the technologies that drive operational excellence across the sourcing, contracting, procurement, supply management, and accounts payable processes of an organization. We publish a number of sites. One of those I'll highlight here, and that's CPO Rising. This is a news and research site that focuses on topics that matter to chief procurement officers, and it's one of our primary areas where we present our ideas and research as it relates to contract management. Now, I guess a little bit of a pitch, right? So for those of you that are procurement executives listening in today or on the recording, invite you to consider attending our CPO Symposium, a day-and-a-half event scheduled for March in Boston. Fantastic opportunity to come, network, learn best practices, and share ideas and understand where the industry as a whole is heading. But now I'm going to dive in and talk a little bit about the presentation today. I should note that our presentation is based upon a report that myself and Matthew York, our co-presenter today, co-authored. Reports of the same title, and that report can be made available to you from DocuSign. But let's just dive into the agenda, right? I think that while the report and today's presentation does focus very specifically on contract management, and we do look at it from a procurement perspective, I do think it makes sense to talk a little bit about what's happening in the world of procurement today. And in 2015, and as we move into 2016. The speed and complexity of business continues to increase, right? Business leaders struggle to keep pace with the ever-changing demands of the market. And while the worldwide economic conditions are more favorable today than they were a few years ago, certainly 7 or 8 years ago, CPOs and other supply management leaders remain resource-strapped, while at the same time they're tasked to do more. Right, and so our research and what we've been focusing on is really trying to get organizations focused on how they can become more agile and how they can leverage solutions and innovative strategies to drive more value with the resources they have in place today. And so let's look at some of the key findings from our 2015 research that focuses on procurement and the CPO. Now, one of the things that we look at, and so this data, just as a point of reference, is drawn from more than 300 CPOs and other procurement executives drawn globally, cross-industry, cross-geography. What we see here is that, it's our view that procurement's future points towards innovation and agility, but the reality is that when it comes to top priorities, procurement and their leaders are still focused on savings first and foremost. Now, I'm not showing you the historical, but this is data and research, that we've been, or these are topics that we've researched over the past decade. And one of the things that, and this is a question that we ask in an annual survey, one of the things that we've started to see is that the focus on and the pressure to deliver savings over the past couple of years has receded. And that's tied in some degree to the business cycle and where we are with that. That's tied in some degree to the amount of sourcing and savings that have been generated in the preceding 5 years, but it also is tied to an expanded view that the larger enterprise is taking of procurement today. And so while there's been a de-emphasis on savings, the things that have gotten onto this chart over the past couple of years have risen in profile, have risen in priority for CPOs and entire procurement organizations, are compliance and innovation. And so, just real quick on innovation, right? We're operating in a world, in an age of innovation, where organizations are increasingly reliant upon their suppliers for their own performance and for their own results, for their own products, right? And this really, highlights the importance of why contract management and being efficient and being effective and having visibility is going to only become more important as we move forward. Second point, and compliance is one that a few years ago was not on this chart when it came to CPO's top priorities. It's now on there in some respect because I think that organizations, and as we'll see in the next slide, understand that the resources they have, the budgets that they have, are going to remain fairly static, and that what they need to do is do the best with what they have, and driving an increasing compliance, which is a huge opportunity for all procurement organizations, is becoming more front and center with the CPOs and what they're focused on over the next couple of years, right? When we look at the challenges to achieving procurement objectives, right, it's the classic people, process, and technology. Finding the right mix of and right blend of your people, the processes, the technology, the talent associated with each. Finding that right mix is an iterative process, and it is challenging. But again, I think that what we're seeing is that more CPOs understand that job recs for even the top performing procurement organizations have difficulty getting a job rec for a couple new directors each year, and so opportunities in the near term and in the intermediate term to drive more efficiency, and it becomes important to remain efficient, but to also drive scalability, right? Procurement organizations are taking on or being given more responsibility each year, and that path we really do think starts with a better focus on technology. Now, I'm going to just pivot here real quick and share some of the benchmarks that we see in the market today. So these numbers represent the average results or the results for the average procurement organization. I won't spend too much time on each of these, but do just want to share that the average procurement organization today has a little bit more than 61% of their total spend under management, right? So that's the third-party spend, your direct, your indirect, your services. For some organizations, it's their CapEx spend. That total ball procurement, the average procurement organization is managing 61%. From a savings perspective, right, so the top CPO priority in the near term and over the next 3 years, that number is 6.6%. Is that an all-time, or is that a decade low? One of the reasons, again, is where we are in the business cycle. Another is, that the amount of sourcing that we've seen continues to increase, with the average procurement organization sourcing almost 50% of their spend competitively. Now, one of the reasons why we as an organization, Ardent Partners, that is, focuses our research on contract management is this last number here, and that is that for the average procurement organization, the percentage of their total spend that is compliant to their contracts is 55%, and that just really opens a huge door of opportunity as it relates to where procurement can drive more value. Now, question to CPOs: if given the resources, the budgets, the staff, the talent that you have today, should your procurement department be doing better, right? So this is a question that is asked without the infusion of new resources or talent or technology. And it becomes really clear that there's just remains a huge opportunity for procurement departments to drive more value going forward, right? Over the past 15 years, we've seen a phenomenal transformation in this industry, but 9 out of 10 CPOs tell us that they're not optimized, that they're not maximizing the results that they could be generating. And one of the ways that we believe that they can maximize those results is through better contract management. And so I'm going to pass this over to Matt York, who's the report author and a procurement analyst here at Ardent. So Matt, tell us a little bit about the race to better contract management.
Thanks, Andrew. Happy to be here and happy to present on a topic that I've researched for years and I'm really passionate about. As our viewers know, procurement departments have long used contract management processes and systems to communicate business requirements, track spend against the contracts, and manage supplier relationships. But now, there are new and innovative solutions that can build upon the status quo to enhance contract management, help procurement organizations be more agile, collaborative, and efficient in their execution, and ultimately drive more value through contracts. So, modern automated and digital contract management solutions can drive significant value across the contract management process and in several different but important ways. They can increase collaboration with internal stakeholders, like legal and procurement teams, as well as external stakeholders, namely the organization's suppliers. Modern contract management tools can also drive greater contract compliance. The fastest way to save money is not to spend it, but the second fastest way is to spend it correctly, and visibility into contracts helps you do just that. They can also enhance supplier performance by providing visibility into how they are performing. Contracts provide the baseline criteria for evaluating supplier performance. On that note, modern contract management tools can help procurement organizations mitigate more risk. As enterprises increasingly rely on suppliers to drive results, they are also increasingly intertwined in their supplier's business. Things are moving faster. Relationships are more complex. More things that impact performance are happening outside the walls of your enterprise. As a result, managing and mitigating supply risk is critical. Decisions on liability and risk exposure should be managed centrally, and automated digital contract management solutions can provide that mechanism. Ultimately, modern, innovative contract management tools can help procurement teams realize greater savings that they identified earlier in the sourcing and supplier negotiation phases. The speed, efficiency, and agility, collectively and separately, increase turnaround times, decrease contract execution timelines, and save all parties a lot of time, money, and effort. Now, from a sourcing perspective, procurement departments that succeed in the consistent execution of their sourcing projects are the ones that take a holistic approach to the entire sourcing process and leverage process automation tools across it. Leading departments define their sourcing process as one that begins with opportunity identification, carries through to contract execution, and seeks to standardize their sourcing policies and processes at the enterprise level. This most assuredly includes contracts. I mean, a sourcing project does not stop at contract award, right? It stops at contract execution. Then you transition to managing the supplier, the relationship, and the contract until it is time to source it again. In fact, contract management is but one pillar of the modern strategic sourcing process, but it is central and foundational to the success of the organization. So what happens when procurement organizations rely on manual, paper-based processes to manage their contracts? Simply put, organizations can incur a number of costs for relying on outdated contract management processes and systems. Consider the time it takes to manually author, edit, process, sign, search for, retrieve, and audit contracts when multiplied by labor costs. Consider also the cost of duplicate or inaccurate work to the enterprise, also when multiplied by labor costs. Additionally, there are the costs of fines and penalties incurred by enterprises due to contractual errors, a lack of contract compliance, and/or a lack of contract oversight. Lastly, there are the opportunity costs associated with being unable to quickly retrieve and review contracts, avoid costly contract renewals and price hikes, or take advantage of more competitive pricing in the market. I mean, if contracts are buried deep within a filing cabinet or are in a pile on someone's cluttered desk, the procurement team may miss an upcoming expiration date and let the contract auto-renew when it might have been beneficial to reconsider their options. So let me stop and ask Andrew a question. Andrew, what do some of these costs look like, and do they add up?
Right. So actually, I'm going to pivot here and actually bring Anu in, right, who can offer both a perspective from solution provider side, but also from a practitioner side, right? I'm sure you've seen whether it's directly as a procurement practitioner or how some of your clients or before they become clients, some of the challenges and costs that they face when they're dealing in a paper-driven contracting process.
Absolutely. So many of our customers want this analysis, sometimes to drive the purchase and other times to be able to justify and prove what they've been able to do. So at DocuSign, we look at costs from 2 points of view in contract management. One is the hard costs, and these are everything including paper, the printing cost, the mailing cost. As a matter of fact, one of our customers had a practice of mailing some of the contracts internationally, and they would do FedEx overnight, from Silicon Valley to the Far East all the time. So all these add up as hard costs in creating the documents, getting them signed. And then there are these soft costs, and that is, I believe, what you've indicated here in terms of labor costs. And when you talk about large organizations at scale, a lot of that labor can add up. So it is not unheard of to have a large procurement organization, say about 100 FTE, to have 1 or 2 people dedicated to creating these binders, putting the yellow stickies on them, and ferrying them around the organization to get the right approvals and signatures. And having seen as a practitioner, Andrew, what electronic signature can do, it is, it's night and day. It is, it's the same experience that people describe when they sign for their home using electronic signature, those 85 signatures that you need to have on your mortgage papers versus being able to do it electronically. It is exactly like that in the corporate world, the ease of it, the speed of it, and I think I'll share some other data with you, but costs are absolutely real.
Right. They are absolutely real, right? And it's one of the reasons why we focused our research on that, right? I mean, I think everybody listening in today has the broad understanding that, if you automate your processes and utilize tools that drive visibility, that streamline and standardize the approach to whatever the business process is, it's contracts, it's sourcing, it's your sales process, that you're going to, that the likely dividend is an efficiency dividend. But we also, in our own research, wanted to drill down into other areas and other areas of opportunity for organizations that, as proof points to show that there's value in focusing on improving poor contract management, right? So in a 2014 study that focused in on contract management drawn from 250 enterprises, what we found was, that there is that additional cost for every dollar that's spent off contract, right? There's a hard and it's now a quantifiable cost. And that cost, for every dollar that's spent off contract, the average enterprise spends anywhere between 6 and 18%. And when you look at the average compliance rates for organizations being at 55%, there's a huge premium being paid for that cost of non-compliance, right? And, it's something that it's one of the reasons why compliance has risen in as a top priority for CPOs as they start to look out at their organizations, right? It's the ability to go out and capture the value that was, to capture and ensure that the value is realized from the hard work done in the sourcing process, which is what I'm going to show you right here on this slide, right? So, what I'm showing you here is the gap between identified savings and implemented savings. So when a contract is awarded, there's an estimate that is given of what the savings is likely to be over that contract term. Organizations that fail to close the sourcing and contracting process, to fail to close those processes and fail to automate them, see a leakage in the order of between 24 and 38% on average, right? And so, part of that can be explained through sort of the course of business and demand management and sort of changes in buying behaviors, but at the core, when the sourcing and contracting processes aren't connected and interlinked. Clearly, if they're automated, the benefits are as well, but it's a way to plug that leakage. And what I think we want to do now is pass it back over to Matt and let him talk about some of the ways that organizations are driving success and closing those, stopping those leaks. Matt?
Thanks, Andrew. So, if you recall from the earlier slides on the state of procurement, there are numerous challenges to achieving procurement objectives and enterprise success. However, they can be overcome largely by being agile, having procurement leadership and staff that are highly responsive and adaptable to enterprise and supplier changes, collaborative in their internal and external relationships, and innovative in their approaches to process improvement. By being light on their feet, an agile staff can enhance processes and relationships without requiring massive overhaul or reset. It can also employ cloud-based, mobile, user-friendly platforms and solutions that do not require significant investment in infrastructure, service, or training. So what are the enablers of these strategies? Automated contract management capabilities and tools like contract authoring, electronic signatures, automated workflows, and mobile-first or mobile-ready applications. They embody the speed, efficiency, and agility that CPOs and business leaders need to overcome resource constraints and deliver more value through the contracting process. Collectively, we refer to these capabilities as digital transaction management, or DTM tools. Now, let's take a look at a few of these. DTM tools can revolutionize the way that enterprises and procurement teams conduct business and codify relationships. For starters, digital contract authoring tools simplify the process for all parties by removing paper from the equation and placing all documents in an online workspace. Here, multiple parties can create and edit contract templates, populate them with reusable clauses and language, and save and tailor them for future use. With version control features like check-in, check-out, last modified by updates, and redlining options, digital contract authoring tools can ensure that parties are not duplicating efforts or working with outdated versions, and that they are incorporating every party's feedback. And once a contract is finalized and is ready for execution, electronic signatures can be created, applied, and saved for future use. Signatories can apply their e-signature and with a mouse click, send it on its way. Contracts no longer have to languish in the mail or in someone's desk waiting to be reviewed and approved. electronic signatures can keep pace with the speed of business and drive B2B relationships to the next level.
Yeah, so let me jump in here, right? So I think Matt just hit upon some of the same things that you did, Anu, when we're talking about the efficiency of getting contracts executed and how to leverage electronic signatures specifically, right? So we borrowed the DocuSign nomenclature here, digital transaction management, right? I mean, what we're talking about in the procurement context is how do you efficiently execute your procurement contracts, the supplier contracts. And so maybe I ask you to comment here on I guess the perspective and DocuSign's, I guess, general approach to the area.
Absolutely. So Andrew, the sticky that you show here on the slide is very symbolic at DocuSign, because that is the sticky that the founder, our founder Tom Gonzer at DocuSign, started out to remove about 13 years ago. How can we get rid of the sticky and make it into an electronic signature? But that's only part of the story. I mean, electronic signature solutions, there are quite a few out there where they can take your signature and PDF it and put it on a document. But everything that goes on before executing the document, and that starts with a clean copy of the contract that you're about to sign. Who is going to approve this contract? Who's going to review it? And we know there can be quite a few stakeholders doing that. Who is going to sign it? Perhaps they need to add their name, their title, etc. All of that pre-work that is to be done before execution is as important in a full solution, and hence digital transaction management. It's not just electronic signature, it is that entire transaction that we manage for you. So likewise, let's say you've executed the contract. Now what are you going to do with it? Where is the repository? And I think we're all familiar with organizations where there are multiple pockets of repositories of contracts in the organization. So creating a fully secure way, a searchable database of all your contracts after they've been executed is also just as important. So it's that complete package which is secure, which is highly available, that we call digital transaction management. Does that address your question, Andrew?
Yes, it does, absolutely. That's great.
Great, thanks, Anu. Just getting back into the process, reviewers can forward the contract for further review via automated workflows and straight-through processes. Rules created during the contract authoring process designate the next reviewer, while the automated nature of the process emails the contract to that person or persons. Reviewers do not have to determine who is next in line or attach the contract to an email. They are automatically done. In fact, reviewers and approvers can access the cloud-based or virtual workspace from anywhere there is an internet connection. And that brings me to the final point here, which is mobile-first or mobile-ready applications. They can operate on a connected platform and by anyone with the proper credentials. These applications are purpose-built for mobile devices and really can allow parties to access contracts via the cloud and work with the documents when and where they need to. Now, principal signatories and reviewers traveling do not have to hold up the entire contract finalization and execution process. They can sign and execute from the road. So this increased efficiency and really improved turnaround time can be a significant value driver for procurement departments. So now I'm going to turn it back over to you, Anu. And my understanding is you're going to go over some use cases that demonstrate how DTM users consistently see high reductions in turnaround time.
Anu? Maybe
Hi there.
On mute. Yes, hey, welcome back.
Thank you. And Matt, I was saying thanks again for the ball here, and a great transition from the point you were making about mobile devices. So what our audience is seeing here is an eye chart, but let me give you a little bit of context for what this data is. At DocuSign, we take customer feedback very, very seriously. We are very close to our strategic customers and how they're deploying and what results they're seeing from their deployments. So what you see here, again, don't expect you to read them, is multiple industries represented in this one slide, but the use case that is represented on the entire slide is procurement-related, contract execution-related. And what we find across the board is that people find their turnaround time going down by over 85%. So no matter what other benefits they see, exactly, that's the Ferrari slide that I wanted to show. Most people, the motivator for them to move to electronic signatures is speed of execution. It's the turnaround time. And it doesn't matter if people started out with a 50-day turnaround time for some of their agreements, or they started out with a 2-day turnaround time for their signatures for some of their simpler processes. Across the board, they're all reporting an 85% reduction in turnaround time. That, to me, was a great epiphany to see across the board, people are seeing benefit in that. Are they seeing cost reduction? Absolutely. We spoke about hard costs. We spoke about soft costs earlier in this presentation today, and people see anywhere from about $5, $6 for, depending on their baseline, they see about a $5 to $6 reduction, all the way to over $100 cost reduction per transaction, depending on what they're doing, but the main driver tends to be speed. The other point I want to make before we move off of this is quality control and increase in quality of execution. I think Matt touched on that. Because it's an automated workflow, you don't have the lost yellow sticky phenomenon, right? If, for example, I'm supposed to sign and then Andrew's supposed to sign after me, Andrew will not even get the document until I have signed the document because I'm in the workflow. So again, the quality of execution, the turnaround time going up because you're finding executives wherever they are traveling, whatever device they're on, whether it's their iPhone or their iPad or any other device, and you're getting them where they are. So you're really, really improving the efficiency of your process and therefore customer satisfaction, which I know is very important to procurement departments across the board. They don't get very high marks on customer satisfaction, and this is a great way to improve that. Next slide, please. Here, I wanted to share with you all of the existing use cases currently in production at our customers that are related to procurement. And this slide is put together as an aid for our customers to say, where do you begin? Where do you begin to apply electronic signatures? There are many opportunities, but this shows you on a speed of implementation versus ROI. And if I can direct your eyes to the top right corner, the place to start for the biggest bang for your buck and fast turnaround is your bread and butter contracts, your MSAs. So you can bring them up quickly onto electronic signature on your digital journey. Back to you, Andrew.
Great. Thanks, Anu. Right, and I mean, and I'll just stop and make the point again, right? So when you're thinking about your contract, the cycle time in contract execution, right? I mean, let's put it in the context and the shift that we've seen over the last couple of years in business, right? For most people listening in today, the products and services, right, the life cycles of what you're offering have begun to collapse, right? And certainly the period of time where companies can charge a premium for their products and services has also collapsed, right? Procurement, this is one of the things, right, I'm very still, just such a proponent about the opportunities for procurement over the next decade and even beyond, is that, what this has done is, right, I mean, procurement organizations used to sort of set it and forget it with their supplier relationships, right? Let's sign the 5-year contract. Let's go through that process, and let's revisit this at the beginning and end of each business cycle. I mean, that has started to shift very dramatically, right? The level of competition, driven in part by globalization, driven in part by advances in technology, have really placed the buyer-supplier relationships, much more front and center in driving, overall enterprise results. What's also happening, though, is that decisions need to be made faster, right? One of the main themes in our procurement-focused research over the past couple of years is agility, and speed in contracting is one component of that and an important element of that. And so I think Matt, set the table, talking about, the race to better contract management. Anu has given, some great use cases and where specifically value can be added and enhanced from a procurement perspective. Now, what I want to do is take a look at what the leading organizations are doing as it relates to their own contract management processes, right? And so we'll start with technology usage, right? And so what we see here are numbers that show that there's still lots of opportunity for process automation to be layered in here, right? DTM is not universal by any means, and I think that as CPOs continue to focus on compliance, that these numbers will continue to rise. They do rise each year, and I think that as organizations begin to get their hands around the entirety of their spend, an element of focus will continue to be on the contracting process and as a result, sort of the compliance results that are driven as a result of that. Now, what we see here, as you would expect, is that, the best in class, given their greater reliance on or usage of contracting tools to drive value, is that they're realizing greater value. But it's not simply the technology that wins the day for these organizations, right? These are organizations that are a little bit more self-reflective, right? They have programs that are designed to ensure that what they're doing remains, at the vanguard, remains at the cutting edge. And I should mention that, I should define the best in class for you, and I'm going to show you some metrics that really bear out the leadership and the advantage that these organizations have. But in every market research study that Ardent Partners performs, we will tier by performance across several metrics the top performers, or specifically the top 20% of performers in a given study, and identify those as the best in class. So the top 20% of the market, what we see here in the blue, the rest, the other 80%, represented by the all others gray. Now, as we look at some of the other capabilities, right, we see, some bigger gaps here than we have on the preceding slides, and still, even the best in class, right, if you have half of the best in class doing something, there's opportunities for even those groups to improve, right? But, the one I always like to focus in on is the tight linkage between sourcing and contracting, and the value, the quantified value, right? So this is an area that I've done market research on for going on 12 years. I've worked in this industry for 17 years. Organizations that close that process, that link these processes together, realize much greater value. Their compliance rates are higher, their savings rates are higher, their savings leakage rates are lower. Ultimately, they place more spend under management, and there's less of a disconnect between what they report out as value delivered and what the enterprise truly views as value received from procurement efforts. I mentioned metrics and, what we see here, right? So, when we look at, what are the drivers of best-in-class performance, and what are the things we look at when we evaluate that performance, right? One of the things, very specifically that we focus in on is spend under management, right? So what level, and I defined spend under management in a previous slide, but, this metric, we think, remains a very important metric for procurement organizations to focus in on. And the good news is that most organizations now have this metric as one that they track and that they know and that they understand, even if their visibility into it is occasionally muted or imperfect. But best-in-class, the reason why spend under management is important is because it speaks to the opportunity that procurement organizations to influence the larger organization in making smart decisions, in finding the suppliers of highest value, in driving savings where that's the target, in mitigating risk. And all of those things are captured, or sort of, codified in the contracts that you have with your suppliers. And what we see here is still from a compliance standpoint, and I did see, one of the questions, well, what do you mean by spend that is contract compliant? And so this is the percentage of all spend, so all third-party spend. What percentage of that number is compliant to contracts, right? So does a contract exist, and then is what was paid or spent compliant to the terms as captured in that contract? And we see for most organizations, that number hovers around 50%. Even for the best in class, they're only at about 2/3 of their total spend. And I mentioned previously, right, all those other dollars that are spent off contract or are non-compliant, the average impact that it has on the organization's bottom line is somewhere between 6 and 18%. So when you start to multiply this times hundreds of millions in spend, billions in spend, these are very real numbers, and it's really why if we pound the desk on a weekly basis to really raise awareness on the challenges, but to raise awareness on the costs so that organizations can take action. And what we see here is that even though the best in class have significant room for improvement as it relates to contracts, at the same time, they're significantly further ahead. They've got significant advantages across all of these areas, and we've talked about a lot of the mechanics or the drivers behind it, but let's look also at some of the advantages from a capabilities and from a functional sort of execution of their contract processes. And so, what we see is that best-in-class procurement departments that have adopted automated contract management solutions report to us a better ability to collaborate with internal stakeholders, like your legal department. Automated workflows, electronic signatures, and straight-through processes can significantly increase stakeholder participation. They can break down the traditional roadblocks of authoring, creating, reviewing, editing, finalizing, and executing contracts. Right? Likewise, these same best-in-class groups report higher levels of connectivity and stronger collaboration with suppliers, due in part to these same contract workflows and processes. Right? It can be frustrating for both parties to endure a lengthy negotiation, right? I mean, we haven't even really brought the supplier perspective into the discussion as late, right? But to have invested significant time into crafting an RFP response and going through, the next stages of that negotiation, and then being brought in and getting to the point where you've got an agreement on, these very significant documents and all of the terms and conditions, things that move well beyond price, and then to have that just languish, unexecuted, and, just waiting without visibility, without response, without knowledge that all of this work that's been invested will be realized, creates tension in a relationship, right? So think about your strategic suppliers. Is that the foot you want to get started on? The best in class don't think so, and they've put in place tools and processes to avoid that. Right? I mean, we can't speak enough about standardization. When you're standardized, when you have processes that are well defined, things move through the process in a much more streamlined way. That's cost savings at the for budgets in your general counsel's department, in your contracting team's department, in the procurement department as well, right? But standardization, people know how to pull in the right terms and conditions. It allows organizations to mitigate risks and to take on risks, but to do so in a way that is acceptable to the larger organization and not done in an ad hoc way. Best-in-class advantages as it relates to visibility, right? So visibility, really in so many ways is the foundation for best-in-class performance across the procurement operation. It's visibility into spend. It's visibility into your supply base. It's visibility into your contracts so that you can understand, what level of compliance you're seeing today. It's so you can understand, it's visibility into contracts so you can understand how well suppliers are performing based upon the criteria that you set forth and that you captured in the agreed upon and executed contract. Now, I'm going to do a few recommendations here, right? I think that CPOs and their procurement teams have a hard enough job adapting to market conditions and staying at pace with the modern business environment, and that's regardless of staff levels, that's regardless of budgets, it's regardless of the expectations that have been placed upon them to continue to increase performance with the same resources effectively. Now, to optimize their current staff and technology infrastructure without significant investment or training, CPOs and procurement teams can adopt automated and digital contract management solutions like the ones we've been talking about today that can enable their staff to become significantly more agile, significantly more collaborative, and significantly more innovative throughout the contract lifecycle. right? I mean, when you take that in whole, this can save them time, money, it avoids opportunity costs and errors and compliance issues, and it can drive greater savings and value and ultimately position the enterprise to gain or maintain its competitive advantage. So let's look at a few recommendations we have for organizations that are looking to improve in this area, right? And you know, I say it all the time, right? But it's, you know, linking your sourcing and contracting processes, right? You know, tools, budgets for electronic tools aside, right? I mean, this is very fundamental, basic blocking and tackling, and ensures that the hard work that's been invested on the front end of a sourcing process is captured and realized by the larger organization. We set forth to you today a broader discussion about the innovation and the different tools and capabilities and solutions that are available in the contract management marketplace. And I would recommend that for those of you that have not investigated this market over the past couple of years, that there are some new and innovative solutions that are out there, and that you should begin to track and investigate them. And you know, I think that, I think we've certainly in our research over the years captured enough sort of hard cost, quantifiable, research that shows the value that organizations gain from having a focus on contract management and from automating these processes. I think we've talked about, most of the presentation talking about bullet number 3, but I think that the fourth point here is one that also I think that we're, I'd like to just take a second on, and that's, organizations, I think that where we are from a business standpoint today at the tail end of 2015 and as we look out into 2016 is that the traditional sort of command and control approach that procurement organizations take, can only get you so far, right? I think that, we're operating in a different landscape today, and that, procurement organizations need to be much more collaborative in nature. They need to be much more engaged earlier in the process, earlier in the sourcing process specifically, and that they've got to rethink sort of the role that procurement plays, right? Certainly compliance is an important part of things, but it's getting the right engagement with the organization at the right time, utilizing tools to communicate that contracts exist and what is expected of the buyers and of the budget holders and of the larger organization. So we're gonna stay around for some Q&A, but what I'd like to do right now is pass it back to Anu and her guest. So Anu.
Great, thank you, Andrew. So Mariella from Safeway is here with us today. Welcome, Mariella. Mariella, are you on mute?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you clearly. I know you've been sitting through the webinar, and I wanted to say welcome. There's a lot going on at Safeway with the merger with Albertsons. So thank you again for being here, Mariella. I like to end our webinars and our talks with a view from the customer. And you have recently implemented electronic signatures, and I know you went with DocuSign, but I was wondering, what was your experience in implementing electronic signature at Safeway?
So first of all, thank you for the invitation, Anu. Good morning, everybody. We implemented DocuSign probably around this time last year, and having experienced the implementation of several systems within the organization, this is probably the easiest implementation. Once we gave the go-ahead, we just had to start working with the business requirements with the DocuSign account manager, got our folks signed up, and we were using it within a matter of days. I mean, a couple days. The training was amazing, so the folks, were using it in a matter of days.
That's wonderful.
It really has, yeah, go ahead.
Please continue.
Yeah, it really has been a very easy transition. The tool, we find it's super user-friendly, very intuitive for folks that are familiar with web technology. So again, as we implemented it, we were sending documents through DocuSign in a matter of days, and the organization has benefited impressively.
how about the adoption from the supplier base? Did you get any pushback, or did people need to be trained on the supplier side to sign these contracts?
I think the pushback has been really minimum. It's mostly folks that have not had any experience with using electronic signatures. I mean, I can only think of a couple where we had to get outside of the process to do it, but no, I mean, I think every single user has seen it, and frankly, it's quite happy that they don't have to receive a document through email, print it, sign it, mail it, or scan it, or fax it. You know, it is, I think, one of the benefits. It's almost like the moment you send the DocuSign document out, you're getting those responses back in hours, whereas before it would take you days and follow-up calls, and where's my document, and what's the tracking number, et cetera, et cetera.
That's great. Mariela, we should do a strategic value assessment on Safeway so we can get another data point about our turnaround time that we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. I mean, we are an example of that. I think when we talked earlier, I mean, we probably have eliminated 90% of the time invested in getting the signatures, just because it's such a fast turnaround.
That's great. So we mentioned Safeway, you know, combining with Albertsons. I was wondering if you have any insights on the timing of when to do this. You know, you did this months before the Albertsons event, if I'm correct?
Yes.
And so what's the learning from that? You know, there's a lot going on in other organizations at a macro level, but is your merger with Albertsons going to benefit because you already have digitized your contract management process?
Yes, absolutely. I think, first of all, I think, you know, the merger would not have impacted it in any way because, again, the beauty is that it's a standalone function. The real approval was if legal was willing to accept the digital signature versus the legal signature. And as we merged with the Albertsons legal folks, that was the first question we asked. And I mean, once they saw the technology, it was they were on board. So I mean, I don't think I think anybody, once you experience it, and I think that's what I want to leave the group with. Once you experience it, it's so easy. I cannot tell you the time on day one of this merger that we spent on emailing contracts to each other. Whereas we were able to go into a contract repository on the Safeway side and just direct them to the link and say, here are all the contracts you're looking for. So, I mean, I think once they see the technology, anybody that has not used it just wants to say, when can you include me and how can I sign up?
Well, that's, yeah, I would imagine the contrast between the two sides, but that's really great. Thank you for sharing that, Mariela. Any other words of advice for our audience who have just gone through, you know, very rigorous, detailed research study on contract management? Any other words of advice?
First of all, I would say one of the things that I did not hear in the webinar is make sure you do put an easy way to search for the documents, because when we use it, I think it's very important to put a process of what is going to be the naming convention, so in the future you can look for them. Also be aware that when you're beginning to look at these systems, you probably underestimate the number of users that you want on it, and that becomes a hurdle because, especially, for example, for us on DocuSign, we initially signed up, you know, just the folks that usually did the paperwork, and now, you know, we need more users because nobody wants to wait anymore. People get so used to the efficiency of it that everybody wants to use it. So as you're looking into implementing any of the systems, make sure you really look at your processes, look at your users, and look at what is going to be the end result. How are you going to name it? Who's going to sign it? How are you going to process it? And again, folks then become really demanding of, oh, you did not think of adding more users, or you did not think of categorizing these things. So spend a good amount of time on figuring your setup so your output becomes so much easier to manage.
great advice there, Mariella. Thank you again, and wanted to make sure our audience heard from you as a user. Appreciate it. And with that, we come to the close of today's presentation, and we will move into Q&A. I think we've got a couple of questions already come in. Let me start out with, I think this is going to be directed to Andrew, adoption levels. So the question here says that contracting tools adoption levels seem very, very low, and I've heard that adoption is a real problem in companies that have even made the decision to go with the CLM system. Is this true?
So our adoption rate's low. I mean, in the context of, supply management solutions in general, I mean, they're in the mix there with the average other applications, right? Even those that are maybe a little bit more front and center from a transactional standpoint, like e-procurement, or from an engagement standpoint, like e-sourcing. So my answer is yes, they're low, but all the other solutions also are low, and that organizations have challenges, gaining budgets, and I think that, I think the first wave, or when you look at the driver of the procurement industry's broad transformation, which began in the late 90s, right? It really was a technology-enabled transformation. So back to, and that the leading organizations are utilizing technology tools at a much higher percentage and to much greater degree within the organization. So I think that there's certainly areas and room for improvement when it comes to contract management solutions across the board. I think that what really needs to happen at the industry level, and not just for contract management solutions, we need that next catalyst, and maybe it is something like mobile, where we start to see enterprises move from desktop, laptop to smart devices, and that might be the impetus. But certainly the technologies and the solutions have greatly improved over the past decade. They are deployed, faster. Cloud has been a driver of that. But certainly, I think, from the contracting process in particular, organizations that, best-in-class organizations tend to think more holistically about the entirety of their operations, and the standardization of their processes and the automation of their processes have been proven to be, real value drivers. So, huge rooms of improvement across the board, and in the contracts area specifically.
That's great, Andrew. And also, from what Mariella was saying, actually, if you can provide a user-friendly tool, then the adoption goes in the other direction, and she was wanting people to plan for more usage, than initially thought. But I think your comments are spot on with the user experience improving, and I think with the impetus of mobility tools, we will see an increase there. Susan, do we have any questions come in through the webinar chat Q&A?
Hi, Anu. So there's one other question. In general, adoption levels for contract authoring tools seem low. Do you think we'll see greater adoption in the near or long term?
That sounds like the same type of question. I mean, again, I would say, when we look at adoption of these tools, I mean, there's two levels, right? So we're tracking the adoption at the enterprise level and market penetrations, and again, we expect these numbers to increase, right? We don't expect 30% of the market overnight to adopt these tools, but again, to sort of reiterate the point, right, the solutions over the past couple of years have become more usable. They're more easily deployed. They become more affordable too, right? There's been a price compression that we've also seen. So that, again, one of the recommendations I had was for organizations that haven't looked at the contract management technology market over the past couple of years, it's worth looking again and investigating, because there has been more innovation. I mean, we're seeing more innovation up and down or across the source settle process. So hopefully that answers that similar question.
Indeed. And Andrew, here's another one. There are so many CLM systems out there. Which one do you recommend?
I would say that if someone wants to contact me directly, that would be fine, because a generic answer on this call, not knowing the enterprise, the number of users, the current systems in place, the budgets, and any number of other questions makes it hard to just simply say it's X is the answer or company Y is the answer. So please feel free to follow up. We take those inquiries all the time and are happy to give our views to those that do.
And the good news is there are a lot of tools now, and there is a good solution for you out there. Yes.
I would say for most organizations, right? I mean, the thing that we've started to see with supply management technologies in general is that, with the rise of cloud and some price compression and some better integration, organizations that fall in the mid-market and the lower end of the mid-market, now, business cases can be made at that level of an organization. So short answer, yes.
Fantastic. And I'm getting the signal from Susan here. I think we've gone over time for questions here, but we'll be happy to answer and follow up. I think you have contact information for all the presenters here and for DocuSign. Please feel free to reach out, and we will also send you copies of the slides. There were quite a few questions about that coming in. And again, I would like to thank our panelists, Andrew, Matt, and Mariella, for being here today and sharing their expertise. And I also want to thank, all the other folks that worked hard to make this webinar possible. Very much thank you to Susan and Jonathan Reimer and their team for pitching in and making this a success. With that, thank you very much and have a great day. Bye-bye. From DocuSign, and I'll be your moderator today. Let me start by saying thank you for making the time in your busy schedule for this very important topic. Contract management is changing, and there are some exciting new developments that we will discover and discuss in this hour. Our speakers today include Andrew Bartolini and Matthew York from Ardent Partners. We also have a special guest, Mariella Ettinger from Safeway, who will be joining us. Just a little bit about our speakers today. So Andrew Bartolini, he's the Chief Research Officer at Ardent Partners and publisher of CPO Rising. He's a globally recognized expert in sourcing, procurement, supply management, and lately, increasingly, accounts payable as well. I've had the pleasure of knowing Andrew for the last several years, and I'm an eager consumer, Andrew, of all the great content from your publication.
Oh, great.
Matt York is a senior procurement researcher at Ardent Partners, and his primary areas of research include sourcing, contracts, procurement, and supply risk. Matthew was previously at Aberdeen Group, again, very deep expertise in procurement, and we're happy to have Matthew here today. Next, we have Mariella. Mariella is a friend and a strategic sourcing group director at Safeway. Mariella manages about $4 billion in indirect spend and is leading the charge toward digitization and is an enthusiastic supporter of electronic signatures. Mariella is going through an amazing journey at the moment at Safeway, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the webinar today. So thank you, Mariella, for being here. And finally, myself. I am the
authored reports of the same title, and that report can be made available to you from DocuSign. But let's just dive into the agenda, right? I think that while the report and today's presentation does focus very specifically on contract management, and we do look at it from a procurement perspective, I do think it makes sense to talk a little bit about what's happening in the world of procurement today. And in 2015, and as we move into 2016. The speed and complexity of business continues to increase, right? Business leaders struggle to keep pace with the ever-changing demands of the market. And while the worldwide economic conditions are more favorable today than they were a few years ago, certainly 7 or 8 years ago, CPOs and other supply management leaders remain resource-strapped, while at the same time they're tasked to do more. Right, and so our research and what we've been focusing on is really trying to get organizations focused on how they can become more agile and how they can leverage solutions and innovative strategies to drive more value with the resources they have in place today. And so let's look at some of the key findings from our 2015 research that focuses on procurement and the CPO. Now, one of the things that we look at, and so this data, just as a point of reference, is drawn from more than 300 CPOs and other procurement executives drawn globally, cross-industry, cross-geography. What we see here is that, it's our view that procurement's future points towards innovation and agility, but the reality is that when it comes to top priorities, procurement and their leaders are still focused on savings first and foremost. Now, I'm not showing you the historical, but this is data and research, that we've been, or these are topics that we've researched over the past decade. And one of the things that, and this is a question that we ask in an annual survey, one of the things that we've started to see is that the focus for, even the top performing procurement organizations have difficulty, getting a job rec for a couple new directors each year. And so opportunities in the near term and in the intermediate term to drive more efficiency, and it becomes important, to remain efficient, but to also drive scalability, right? Procurement organizations are taking on or being given more responsibility each year, and that path we really do think starts with a better focus on technology. Now, I'm going to just pivot here real quick and share some of the benchmarks that we see in the market today. So these numbers represent the average results or the results for the average procurement organization. I won't spend too much time on each of these, but do just want to share that the average procurement organization today has a little bit more than 61% of their total spend under management, right? So that's the third-party spend, your direct, your indirect, your services. For some organizations, it's their CapEx spend. That total ball, procurement, the average procurement organization is managing 61%. From a savings perspective, right, so the top CPO priority in the near term and over the next 3 years, that number is 6.6%. Is that an all-time, or is that a decade low? One of the reasons, again, is where we are in the business cycle. Another is, that the amount of sourcing that we've seen continues to increase, with the average procurement organization sourcing almost 50% of their spend competitively. Now, one of the reasons why we as an organization, Ardent Partners, that is, focuses our research on contract management is this last number here, and that is that for the average procurement organization, the percentage of their total spend that is compliant to their contracts is 55%, and that just really opens a huge door of opportunity as it relates to where procurement can drive more value. Now, question on and the pressure to deliver savings over the past couple of years has receded, and that's tied in some degree to the business cycle and where we are with that. That's tied in some degree to the amount of sourcing and savings that have been generated in the preceding 5 years, but it also is tied to an expanded view that the larger enterprise is taking of procurement today. And so while there's been a de-emphasis on savings, the things that have gotten onto this chart over the past couple of years have risen in profile, have risen in priority for CPOs and entire procurement organizations, are compliance and innovation. And so, just real quick on innovation, right? We're operating in a world, in an age of innovation, where organizations are increasingly reliant upon their suppliers for their own performance and for their own results, for their own products, right? And this really, highlights the importance of why contract management and being efficient and being effective and having visibility is going to only become more important as we move forward. Second point, and compliance is one that a few years ago was not on this chart when it came to CPO's top priorities. It's now on there, in some respect because I think that organizations, and as we'll see in the next slide, understand that the resources they have, the budgets that they have, are going to remain fairly static, and that what they need to do is do the best with what they have, and driving and increasing compliance, which is a huge opportunity for all procurement organizations, is becoming more front and center with the CPOs and what they're focused on over the next couple of years, right? When we look at the challenges to achieving procurement objectives, right, it's the classic people, process, and technology. Finding the right mix of and right blend of your people, the processes, the technology, the talent associated with each. Finding that right mix is an iterative process, and it is challenging. But again, I think that what we're seeing is that more CPOs understand that job recs for
Global Head of Procurement at DocuSign. Previously, I've been in operations, supply chain, and procurement roles at several companies, including Cisco and Kaiser Permanente. So everyone on our panel today is very familiar with the challenges involved in contract management, and we're all excited to be tackling this topic today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew and Matt, and they're going to walk us through the majority of the presentation, and we'll make sure that there's plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Andrew, off to you.
Great. Thank you, Anu. We are both very excited to be here, speaking for Matt. So just real quick, right, so Ardent Partners, we're a research and advisory firm based in Boston, Massachusetts. We focus, solely on supply management, right? So we look at the strategies, the processes, the technologies that drive operational excellence across the sourcing, contracting, procurement, supply management, and accounts payable processes of an organization. We publish a number of sites. One of those I'll highlight here, and that's CPO Rising. This is a news and research site that focuses on topics that matter to chief procurement officers, and it's one of our primary areas where we present our ideas and research as it relates to contract management. Now, I guess a little bit of a pitch, right? So for those of you that are procurement executives listening in today or on the recording, invite you to consider attending our CPO Symposium, a day-and-a-half event scheduled for March in Boston. Fantastic opportunity to come, network, learn best practices, and share ideas and understand where the industry as a whole is heading. But now I'm going to dive in and talk a little bit about the presentation today. I should note that our presentation is based upon a report that myself and Matthew York, our co-presenter today,